Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 2vement dWo podcast. Let me stress
Well,
the
you called
D.
it the 2vement dWo
You didn't let me
podcast.
finish.
Wow.
I was going to say, let me stress the dWo. I was trying to do you a solid, but since you're being
You
so rambunctious, welcome to the dWo podcast. This is your host, Davey D, and ignore the other guy.
was a vengeful one.
Whatever. Today we're gonna talk about a topic that it hasn't been discussed. It's kind of like the little skeleton in the closet. Everyone knows is there. We acknowledge is there, but we don't really address it. Today's topic is going to be about gambling addiction. And we know that this game within its own right has its addictive qualities, but along with that, there is the gambling aspect when it comes to like pulling megas or, buying token cases. Vengeful is more astute when it comes to figuring out odds and all that. I don't get bogged down in it, but we're going to have I did some research online about gambling and addiction and means of addressing it and the causes of it. You'll hear about it as we go through. So as I read through, the vengeful is going to interject as he sees fit, like what relates to the game and the personal experiences. And at the end of this segment, we're going to have a short interview we did with a player called Futurepro, who shared with us his own personal experiences with gambling and addiction. And we hope that this podcast would be really helpful and insightful to you guys. At the end of it, we're going to have links with resources that you can use to contact professional help, as well as all the links that I use to cite my research. Do you have anything to add to that before I get into it, Vengeful?
Yeah, well, I'll just preface it by saying, this is a game, and we always need to remember that it's hard to do so because of some of the psychological factors that we've talked about on the show before, for our longtime listeners, between envy, between the feeling of, not being enough with your roster,
Yeah.
or just the environment. You see other people pulling for certain megas and you're like, I want that too. And you get down a hole. We've talked about rage pulls. We've talked about all these things. And this kind of, we're hoping that all of that kind of gets encompassed within this topic here, because ultimately I feel if we can really allow this to be a game
Mm,
and only a game, then it's incredibly enjoyable, right?
fair
But
points.
if we allow those factors to come into play, it can really wreak havoc on the finances of any given player. And my hope is that through this podcast, specifically this episode, if we can stop one player from going down that route, then this whole effort is worth it. And that's the mindset that I'm going with it. So we hope you find a tremendous amount of value out of this, and let's get started.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Like you said, if only it helps one person, then we've done a great job. Okay, let's get into it. Dictionary definitions. What is gambling? Gambling is defined as playing a game of chance for stakes. Dictionary definition. What is addiction? Addiction is defined as the state of being enslaved to a habit or practice or to something that is psychologically or physically habit forming to such an extent that its cessation, which means, ending it, causes severe trauma. Gambling addiction is classified as a mental health disorder and has similarities to other addictions, such as a chemical addiction, like drugs. Um, Short segue for me when I read that part when it says gambling addiction is classified as a mental health disorder, it put me in check because I'm a person that I like to say I take pride in the fact that I have self control. And when I see people talking about, oh, I need to pull, I can't stop pulling, and all this kind of stuff, it's like, have some self control, but it goes beyond just having the physical fortitude to stop pulling. Like it says, it is a mental health disorder, which means I am not too au fait with the scientific particulars of it, but that means that even if they wanted to, they really couldn't without some sort of extra help facilitating them having the ability to do as such. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's In terms of it being a mental health disorder, it is kind of classified. Also, when you look at other mental health disorders, are things that have a material impact on the way that somebody goes about their life, right? And so to add to that, yeah, it may look, for somebody that has it control, that says, okay, it's just a game. I'm just going to take what I get from it, and from occasionally I'll do a pull and that sort of thing, and they're fine with that. Might not understand, what this
Right.
draw is, and what it can do. But the truth is that, and my hope is that, at least if this is something that you don't deal with, but you've witnessed others maybe in your faction dealing with it, I hope maybe even this piece of information can help us reach out to them with a little bit more empathy,
Yeah.
because it's a real thing. It's a real issue. And I think in both of those, honestly, I think aspects of this game fit gambling and fit addiction. When you're talking about playing a game of chance for stakes, yeah, I mean, pulling a mega is absolutely a game of chance, and the stakes can be big.
Yeah.
Like if you pull, Acrobat Macho Man, your game will change forever.
Significantly.
Like
Yeah.
that's stakes.
Yeah.
That's stakes. You're talking about a competitive game, feuding and whatnot. Those are stakes. And
Yeah.
then, being enslaved to the habit. I think, yeah, like we talked about with Jerichoholic and a few others in the past on this podcast, when you're in that flow of like, you did the 30 pull, didn't get it, and then you do it again, you're like, that's a habit. And once you keep doing it, it's very hard to break.
Right. Right. Why is gambling addictive? Recent studies in psychology, neuroscience, and genetics demonstrated that gambling and drug addiction are far more similar than previously realized. In the middle of our brain is a reward system that links other regions involved in memory, movement, pleasure, and motivation. When we engage in an activity that excites us, neurons in the reward system release a chemical called dopamine, which gives us a wave of satisfaction and encourages us to make this behavior into habit. The sense of anticipation creates an adrenaline rush, a feeling that some people believe they cannot live without. So, what this is basically saying, whenever we engage in activities that we find stimulating, the reward system in our brain is just not one thing. It is linked to memory. Oh, I remember what it felt like. It links to movement. If I do such and such action, I will get this reward. It's linked to pleasure, which is then linked to motivation. So it's not like one segment. It's like a puzzle with many pieces that fits together to make this perfect picture. And this picture always goes back to dopamine, which is this adrenaline rush, this pleasure chemical that some people literally can't live without. It is one thing if you're going for your drug fix outside of you, but when your body is actually producing that drug, and these are the recipe is if you do A, B, C, D, E, you get dopamine, then your body is going to want to continually make a habit of that recipe in order to get that rush.
Absolutely. And to add to that, I think we'll get into this in the interview that we have with Futurepro later in this episode. But we've also come across it with, I think I've talked about it. I know Big Papa Brian talked about it on his first 30 pull. He got Brock Lesnar, the 3-star bronze,
Yeah.
the mega, and we've heard about it from other people as well. Like, they did the first mega pull, they got the guy, and that's the primacy effect also, where ever since that point, you get the initial dopamine rush,
Yeah.
right? And you get that feeling of euphoria. You're like, I want this again. But there's also the primacy effect where you say, oh, it's in your brain has decided, oh, it's not that hard to get the mega, right? So the next time you pull and you don't get, it's like, well, I'm very close. I'm gonna get him next time. Okay, maybe one more 30 pull, I'll get him. Before you know it, you're 13 pulls deep and you're questioning your life. But it all started with that dopamine rush in the beginning, because and I think a lot of us, whether it's pulling a mega or sometimes it's getting a 4-star silver token from those crappy 2, 3, 4 cases, or
Yeah.
pulling Undertaker from a tomb. Like all these things are low probability events. And when you get them, you're like, wow, that's so great. And you want it again. And that's the dopamine. That's the dopamine talking.
I can co-sign on that Undertaker tomb thing because I was so lucky to get him from my urn that when I was doing the blitz, the streak blitz, it was already in my mind, maybe I can get the 3-star, maybe I can get the 3-star. And I just kept doing blitzes and blitzes until I had to come to the realization, you know what? I got lucky and I probably need to just stop.
Oh yeah.
So like you
Oh
said,
yeah.
the primacy effect, once you get lucky that first time, it sets the precedence of, okay, it can happen again. And like you said, that's how you go down that rabbit hole.
Exactly.
It says continuous exposure to such stimuli robs it of its power to induce euphoria, meaning continually doing the things that give us a dopamine rush, eventually it diminishes its addictive properties. Addictive activities, substances keep the brain flooded in so much dopamine that eventually it adapts by producing less dopamine and becomes less responsive to its effects. As a consequence, addicts need larger and larger amounts of their vice to get that dopamine high. At the same time, neural pathways connecting the reward circuits to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is an area of the brain at right behind your eyes. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for taming impulses. So at the same time, you're becoming less susceptible to dopamine. The prefrontal cortex, which regulates impulses, becomes weaker. In other words, the more an addict engages in their vice, the harder it becomes to stop. Research shows that pathological gamblers and drug addicts share many of the same genetic predispositions for impulsivity and reward seeking. So, from my estimation of what I just read, it just seems that people who have addictive tendencies already are born with weakened prefrontal cortexes and are susceptible to seeking a dopamine rush.
I will interject this one thing as a medical person myself.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I see the genetic predispositions, and the reality is we're still learning on the whole the impact of genetics, and especially epigenetics. Genetically, we're actually, most of us are extremely similar.
Mm-hmm.
Epigenetically, which is which genes are methylated, which means basically which ones are turned on and off, that sort of thing, that varies from person to person, and that can change. That can be
Hmm.
changed. So, when you hear people talk about I'm genetically predisposed to hypertension, there are some people that are, but that doesn't mean that they can't be affected by lifestyle change.
Right.
But most people, it's because your shitty diet, like,
Mm.
so I would say, yes, there might be some similarities for the predisposition for impulsivity and reward seeking, but it's not limited to gambling. There's other aspects in their lives that they might have that tendency that might be rewarding for them. I mean, think about it. You have to look at it as a survival mechanism. Like, we have these behavior tendencies because that helped us survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
In times where we weren't in these modern societies. So there are tendencies that are good for survival that just aren't good for the modern world sometimes, but that doesn't mean that it can't be changed. But I will say this, going back to the part about basically the prolonged dopamine exposure, the prolonged euphoria, that you need more of the stimulus. We hear that, people with, let's say, alcohol addicts, that sort of thing. And I think anybody that's drank will know that you eventually need, more and more
Yeah.
to have the same effect, that sort of thing. And I would say in my case, because I would say that I've gone through some of these problems and then come out to a certain, not super deep, but certainly have gotten a new perspective on the game. Initially, getting your first 3-star bronze, let's say mega pull, or making your first 3-star silver, the first enhance or the first 3-star gold. It's extremely satisfying, right?
Yeah.
And then you get the second one, it's a little less satisfying. Eventually you're up to like 13 3-star golds and you're like, I don't know what you can do to give me that
The
thrill
rush.
again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, give me Undertaker from a Tomb. That's a new thing. And then immediate euphoria that I got, recently,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But pulling Undertaker from the Tomb is more exciting than taking him to 3-star gold, which will happen in the next whenever, right?
Yeah.
So, and or even more exciting, actually using the character, right? The euphoria is in the most difficult to obtain things, and it only gets more and more and more difficult to find those low probability events that you're going to get that response from. So ultimately, you have to recognize that, okay, prefrontal cortex, that's your logical rational brain,
Hmm.
which is the one that's telling you, oh, I shouldn't pull, I don't need to pull, I don't need this
Right.
character. But at some point it's like, you know what, making the pull for, let's say, tech DDP that's coming out in a few hours from when we're recording this, that might be the only thing exciting left in this game for some people, and
Yeah.
you have to balance that with what is your budget, and that, and knowing ahead of time how much you're gonna go. Otherwise, you can just fall right into this trap.
Mm. Good points. Not to jump ahead of ourselves, when you said that people can basically change their epigenetic predispositions, I think I had read something that says if you change your habits for 30 days, it rewires your brain to adopt to that new habit. Is that along the same lines?
Yeah, I mean, uh, the things that cause the habit cycle to continue are a certain type of stimulus. So maybe for us, it's simply opening the game, just seeing
Mm-hmm.
that loading screen or seeing the
Yeah.
icon on your phone.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, how's this? How many of you, maybe Davey, you yourself, or any of you listening, maybe it's the Facebook app or some other app, that have you ever had an app that it's on your phone and your thumb just opens it without you even
Yes.
thinking about it?
Mindlessly. Yes.
Mindlessly, right?
Yeah.
Why? That's a habit cycle. Now try this. Take that app and drag it way over to like the farthest right home screen. Gone, because the stimulus is gone.
Yeah. That's true.
So
Yeah.
if you change the stimulus, then you'll be able to change the habits that flow from it, and that's super important.
Wow. Good stuff. Okay. Reasons for gambling. In a survey of 5,500 gamblers, the prospect of the chance to win big money was the strongest factor. In our case, win a mega. Closely followed by because it's fun and exciting. People are ultimately buying entertainment and may tend to view gambling as a low risk, high yield scenario, which is false as the odds always favor the house. Despite that, the thought and excitement of hitting the jackpot are often too alluring, regardless of the probability. Like we see people who constantly, like you say, rage pulling megas because this is it's just like you say. Well, like the article says, like low yield, high reward, but cumulatively speaking, over the grand scheme of everything, is like the complete opposite. But just chasing that rush of hitting the jackpot is what keeps these people going.
Right.
Types of gamblers. So this is a list of you. You can see where you fit in. They're professional gamblers. These people make their living by gambling and consider it a profession. They're skilled players and are able to control both the amount of time and money spent gambling. So these are people with a strong prefrontal cortex
Yeah,
management.
and I would also add that they have trained themselves to be that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen by, it's not like somebody's born and like, oh yeah, you're going to be a professional gambler. Like they train themselves to really be detached from the the outcomes I mean, at least to some degree, and really look at the mathematics of it and say, okay, this is what I'm willing to risk, and this is the risk reward. I know exactly what I'm going into. If I get it, great. If I don't, and it's that same kind of mentality that's needed for, let's say, professional traders in the market, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that there's probably an element of that we can learn from as gamers in many of these mobile games. As this loot box system is so prevalent across, actually more than just mobile games, console games now too.
Yeah.
Knowing that, okay, this is what I'm going in for, these are the odds, and this is my probability of success, and I'm okay with that, and I'm not going to go any further than that, because this is my own risk profile. I'm aware of myself, and this is what I'm going to do. If I get it, great. But it's there's a likelihood of failure, right? But it's that possibility of thrill in a controlled manner that makes it entertaining. And this is all about entertainment. So you can do entertainment responsibly.
Right.
And I think we can learn a lot from professional gamblers and market traders, really.
Right. Okay. The next category is antisocial or personality gamblers. These use gambling as a way to get money by illegal means. They are likely to be involved in fixing games in their favor. They're casual and social gamblers. Gambling may be a form of distraction for them, like being entertainment or a form of relaxation. For example, people who may bet on a simple pay-per-view or the Super Bowl, very casual. They're serious social gamblers. They invest more of their time in gambling. These individuals place gambling second in importance to family and their vocation. It's comparable to somebody you would call a golf nut whose main source of relaxation is playing golf. So these people's main form of, detachment from stress in the world is gambling. There's relief and escape gamblers. They gamble to find relief from feelings of anxiety, depression, anger, boredom, or loneliness. They use gambling to escape from crisis or difficulties. Gambling provides an analgesic. Am I pronouncing it right? Analgesic effect rather than a euphoric response. They are not compulsive gamblers and are identical to relief and escape drinkers.
I'll just jump in on that one.
Yeah, do that.
So analgesic meaning like a pain relief effect rather than a excitement or euphoric. This is really dangerous. And I would venture to say, if you are somebody that does deal with chronic anxiety, depression, anger, boredom, loneliness, the things that have been mentioned here, those are things that require help, right? And those are things that can be overcome with the right help. The use of any type of gaming or gambling platform to try to address those things or escape from those things, just think about it. If all it's giving you is a little bit of relief rather than even excitement, there needs to be a much more extensive therapy and rewiring of the neurons in the brain to get yourself back to a place where it's a fun thing. It's not a pain relief thing. It's just I hear that and I feel I understand it from my own past. It is something you can overcome, but don't, it's really dangerous to go down this road here.
Right.
If you're kind of like using it as an escape.
Okay. Compulsive gamblers, they have lost control over their gambling. For them, gambling is the most important thing in their lives. It is a progressive addiction that harms every aspect of their life negatively. It affects their families, friends, and employers. They may engage in activities that go against their moral standards, such as stealing, lying, or embezzling.
And I think our guest probably falls closer into this category in terms of losing all control over gambling. And I think as listeners, you'll find that pretty insightful. Like, this is the extreme that it can go to. So if you find yourself going down this route, definitely get yourself some help.
Yeah, like we said at the end of this podcast and in the video description, you'll have those links for help for you. Risk factors for developing a gambling habit: family history of addiction, depression, anxiety. As stated before, these people usually gamble to medicate. Situations which kickstart compulsive gambling: close personal loss, stress at home or at work, a considerable win early on, or debt. I'm gonna let you do the
Yeah,
considerable win.
considerable win early on. This is what happens when you pull a mega like way early.
Yeah.
You know, if you did like 530 pulls to get your first mega, chances are you're not going to do much more of that. But if you got your first mega pretty, you know, maybe in the first 30 pull, or even with single pulls or a t-shirt pull or something
Oh
like that,
man, yeah.
you're in, you know, I'm not gonna say you're in trouble, but beware, you know. And then as far as like, yeah, I mean, close personal loss, stress, debt. I mean, these are life things, right? And that's where, like, you know, Copy said in the previous episode, this game is entertainment. The budget that you commit to it should be in your entertainment budget. It shouldn't come out of anything else. And if you're going through issues in those areas, the game is not going to fix them. And you know that. Your
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex knows that this game is not going to fix your life issues, right? And
Yeah.
I understand entertainment as escape, but ultimately, escape is not going to solve the problem. You have to face them. And once you face them, you'll be much more free to enjoy the game, enjoy other aspects of your life without being tied down to the real underlying root cause of pain.
Yeah. Signs of addiction: feeling the need to be secretive about gambling. Well, we can talk about the people who hide their iTunes receipts from their significant other. Having trouble controlling gambling habits, gambling when you can't afford to, people borrowing money, taking out loans. I mean, it may sound ludicrous, but it has been done. Your friends and family expressing concern about your gambling. Why do people keep gambling after losing? Even in loss, your body is still producing adrenaline and endorphins surrounding the excitement of the event. In some instances, losing could boost the positive response to a win. When a person loses a lot, it lowers their expectations. This in turn increases how happy they will feel when they eventually win. This alone can be tantalizing. Gamblers can become so addicted to the game and the hope to win that they fall into deeper financial, social, and professional trouble. Everything about their lives gradually revolves around gambling and is affected by it. I know for myself at one point, even though I wasn't the person who does all the pulls, like I caught myself rearranging my life schedule around the game. Oh, this event starts at this time, so I need to schedule this thing so it doesn't interrupt that. And like, you know, you start to lose focus on what is really the priority in your life. So, you know, the addictive factor of the game, aside from the gambling, you have to be aware of that you don't put this form of entertainment as precedent over handling business, handling family affairs, stuff of that nature. And like it says, you know, the whole excitement around the event, there's still adrenaline and endorphins that are egging you on, like one more time, just go one more time, the next time is your chance to win. You can liken it to like blitz. You almost beat the blitz, you know you can't beat the last person, but it's like you never know, just give it one more chance. And those blitz tickets in a sense are a form of currency. So if you were to liken that to real life, when you're using real money, then you can put yourself in the seat of a person who is struggling with gambling, because the excitement, the adrenaline, the endorphins are telling them the next time is your chance to win. And like we said earlier, the game is always rigged in the house's favor. Short-term and long-term effects of gambling addiction. Gambling is associated with many additional effects in both the short and long term. Gambling addiction frequently results in other addictions that serve as coping mechanisms for people who are stressed out by the activity. When trying to cut down on their gambling or stop altogether, some gamblers experience psychological withdrawal symptoms. Like someone with a drug or alcohol problem, they become irritable, impatient, agitated, or tense if they do not get their dose of gambling. Many gamblers turn to drugs, alcohol, and other activities to alleviate the anxiety brought on by the gambling lifestyle. Even if a gambler never experiences financial ruin as a result of the lifestyle, they may struggle with drug and alcohol addiction for the rest of their life after self medicating to deal with the stress. Also, relationships are often permanently damaged as a result of gambling. Gambling addiction is an illness that is chronic and progressive, but it can be diagnosed and treated. Um, where it talks about people basically adopting another vice to cope with this vice, do you have any experience or advice for that scenario?
I mean, yeah, it definitely can happen. I'm pretty sure if everyone thought about that happening in their own life, where you're really super focused on one thing and then something else pops up, and now all of a sudden the first thing that you were super focused on becomes less interesting because you're kind of shifted. And honestly, in this game, that's happened too. Like in more recent times, it went from just like you said, shifting things around in your life to fit the game schedule.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, had certain things come up in, let's say, personal or professional life that are just super exciting in a positive way. And when I immerse myself in that, and then I look later, I'm like, wow, I almost didn't complete the LT tour, or I didn't max out that event, and that's fine. I don't care, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do it in a positive way, you can do it in a negative way.
I like that aspect, doing it in a positive way. Yeah.
And I would say, because we're gonna get into treatment here in a second, and I'll just preface this by saying, to some people, some of these might seem like woo woo or whatever. The reality is that I've actually seen some of these treatments work for not for gambling addiction, but for actual drug addiction and alcohol addiction.
mm-hmm.
And fundamentally, you have to give the body the nutrition and the circumstances that it was, evolved to live on
Yeah. Yeah.
before you kind of expect anything else to resolve. So, but I would also say from a purely applied psychology standpoint, we've talked about it on the podcast many times. Focus on what you're grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on what you're grateful for, because if all of a sudden it turns into, when you're addictive cycle of doing pulls or burning through your limited blitz tickets to try to get that undertake from the urn or whatever the case may be, whatever, or just over pulling on your token bags because you really want that one token, right?
Yeah.
If you constantly as a life practice, really focus on the things that you're grateful for, whether it's within the game, like maybe it was that lucky pull that you got, and maybe that changed the course of the game for you, and you've really enjoyed using that character. Great, focus on that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's outside the game. Maybe it's it's your relationship. Maybe you're really happy with the person that you're with. Focus on that. Maybe it's your job. Maybe your job's going really well, and focus on the things that are making. Maybe it's your pet. My dog's walking around right here, and as we're recording this, and there are times that I might be upset about something, whether it's game or anything else, and you just take a moment to sit with your dog, and just spend some time, right? Pet your dog, play, whatever. In those moments, you can't tell me that you're thinking about, right? Because you're in that state of gratitude for, like, wow, I really lucked out with this dog. I really
Yeah.
lucked out with my dog or with my job. I really lucked out with focus on that. And again, what you're doing is you're training your mind to look at different stimuli. So instead of the stimuli of the loading screen or the next mega showing up on your screen as the stimulus, so I got a pull, you're changing the stimulus you're most responsive to every time you see your dog, you get that surge of appreciation. Like, isn't that a good thing? Why would you
Yeah.
not want that?
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there before we get into some of these other things.
Appreciate it. And before we get into these treatments, let's just, well, I should preface it that I am not a medical professional, so I cannot recommend any sort of drugs or treatments that a professional would be able to recommend. Vengeful is a professional. I don't know what the legal his legal.
Yeah, well, none of you are my patients, so so I
I'm
can't
just
make any personal recommendations. None of these are individualized medical advice, so
right.
don't take it as such. That's the disclaimer. This is just for educational purposes only, just to open your mind to a few different things that are out there if you're looking for help, and you'll need to find somebody trusted and local who can help
Yes.
you for sure.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so first up are drug treatments. As stated earlier, since in some cases depression and anxiety are precursors to developing a gambling addiction, the most common way to treat a gambling problem is to prescribe anti-anxiety and antidepressant medicines. However, on the flip side, people can become addicted to those medications and have to deal with the side effects that come with them. You know, at the end of the commercials on TV, they say it may cause this, it may cause that, it may cause death. Like, so you really need to be careful what you're putting in your body to treat yourself. And for those who are very concerned about what they put inside of their bodies, there's alternative treatments. And like Vengeful said, you know, these aren't foo-foo treatments. He's actually seen results happen. And is a pretty considerable list. So there's something for everyone. The first one is acupuncture. Acupuncture helps identify stress details that may be related to the addictive behavior and can help these problem areas. From what I understand about acupuncture, it's all about energy centers in your body and reactivating those energy centers to flow correctly. Are you more au fait with
Yeah,
acupuncture?
it's difficult to explain in a short
Yeah.
manner, but basically it's traditional Chinese medicine is a paradigm of looking at the body that is obviously different than the Western model, but when done properly, so go to like a really trained person and not you know not just anybody. When done properly, um, yeah, I mean, I've seen people quit smoking. Just from the specific protocols that address overall balance of body systems.
Mm.
So, and to give you an idea, I worked with a medical doctor who had been 25 years in the ER, incredible amount of experience there. And at some point, she decided that, I want to do something that will help people long term instead of, short term, saving their lives. And she was drawn toward learning traditional Chinese medicine. She spent 4 years studying that. And she said at first I was learning this stuff going, that's not what the spleen does. This is ridiculous. This is stupid.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, once she opened her mind, she said later, and mind you, she's in her 60s. She's been practicing medicine for so long.
Yeah.
She said, once I finally opened my mind, studied it in detail and applied it in practice, she said both systems talk about the same thing in different ways. That's all it
Mm.
is. So
Basically, looking at the same coin from the different side.
yeah.
Okay. Next up is pet therapy. Physical and psychological benefits include lowered stress and blood pressure, increased beta endorphin levels, a hormone produced by the brain and nervous system that reduces pain. These are just like a few of the benefits of pet therapy. Like Vengeful said, when he sees his dog, he's very grateful, and that sense of euphoria that comes from it. There's aromatherapy, which makes use of our olfactory senses, which is our noses, to increase well being. I believe they said the nose is the only organ that is directly linked to the brain, like the shortest
That's correct.
distance. Yeah,
Yep.
so whatever you inhale is directly affecting your brain chemistry. If I'm right in assuming that, am I?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
It's the first cranial nerve.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm a genius. Creative arts therapies. These offer the opportunity to get in touch with the inner self and can provide a form of expression for feelings that cannot be easily identified or put into words. As an artist, I can definitely agree with this because there are times when you, how can I put it? It's like if you're shaking up a champagne bottle and there's a cork, and that cork is words, or if you want to write something, and the only way to pop that cork is either like say like expressing in poetry, expressing in photography, painting, whatever thing that is artistic, because you can't find any other avenue to vent, then you just let your sensible tangibilities take over for you. Your, I guess I could say, your primal instincts, your um intuitive form of communication that is outside of the predetermined ways of how people think you should communicate. Once you release to those, then your body is able to subconsciously vent on a physical level. I hope I'm making myself um, clear to the listeners.
Yeah.
Homeopath. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'll just say also, and the reason why those type of activities. How many times have you had a sensation and you had to say like, I can't explain it in words,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's because you actually can't explain it in words. Your words are at a completely different part of the brain than the emotions that you're feeling. And what's nice about these creative outlets is that you can actually engage those parts of the brains that aren't conducive to language, and you can express them in different ways, and that's why they're so effective.
I'm googling it right now because I am not sure. But when you said a different part of the brain, there's two hemispheres: the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. One of those hemispheres is strictly for creativity, and the other hemisphere is like the analytical type.
Yeah, traditionally the idea is left brain is more analytical, right brain is more creative.
Right. So you're
Um,
activating the other part that you may not usually use, that is more suitable to expressing and, working through what you're feeling. Okay. Homeopathy is a non toxic system of medicine using highly diluted medicines to treat illnesses and relieve discomfort. It is thought that homeopathic remedies are able to stimulate a person's bodily systems to deal with stress and illness more efficiently.
yeah, and I'll just mention that homeopathy is something that's used extensively in Europe and Asia as an almost primary form of medicine. Not very common in the United States, but for our listeners overseas, you're probably much more familiar with it. And again, it's another one of those systems of medicine that, especially for mental health, again, you can't just go pick something off the shelf. You got to go to somebody that knows what they're doing. But
Yeah,
if you go to somebody that's trained, um, I've seen some incredible results from a mental health standpoint.
awesome. Hypnosis. Hypnosis is a calm state of focused attention which leaves a person more susceptible to suggestions. It helps the person set goals, reinforcing these goals and how to accomplish them. Some people have found hypnosis to be a useful part of a total recovery program. Journaling. Journaling is an excellent tool for self reflection, charting your progress, recording your daily experiences and thoughts, and identifying your goals, habit patterns, conflicts, and gratitude. Um, I think it's very good to, for a long term project, to see where you started and where you've ended up and the change um, from A to Z.
Yeah.
That's actually a good overall view of you seeing yourself and learning yourself from an objective point of view, because once you're in the moment you're just experiencing those feelings and sensations and thought processes, but once you've been removed from it and you're looking at it, you're like, wow, like this can be either really profound to see or really sad to see. Because for me, I've been working on a project for a number of years. I have dealt with depression. I didn't know it was depression at the time, but at the time when I was going through stuff, I would write poetry. And in recent times, I was like, I'm going to make a book with my poetry and I'm going to illustrate the art for it. And when I look back on that person that I was when I was going through those things, I felt so sad for myself, like so sad for that person. I was viewing it as an outside viewer, as like, I feel so bad for this person. And now that I'm on the other side, I can see that as a different entity as opposed to when I was as when I was in it as that person. So having taken the chance to journal and document and de-stress and vent and basically self-medicate to where I am as a better person, I can definitely testify that journaling uh, is a form of legitimate medication. Because sometimes for those of you that follow this the Christian faith, the Bible says, physician, heal yourself. Sometimes we are literally equipped with all the help we need. It's just a matter of tapping into that innate knowledge of what our body needs to heal itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're just also in a society now where, I mean, I was listening to a podcast interview with Jay Shetty recently, who's a monk that returned back to the modern world, I guess you could say, with a tremendous amount of insight and whatnot. And, you know, he was talking about how with our phones and social media these days, we
Mm-hmm.
can go look outside of ourselves
Yeah.
and see this idealized view of other people's lives and experience so much envy, so much jealousy, and so much pain in one day than our ancestors may have done in a lifetime.
Yeah.
In one day, we can experience
Wow.
more pain than others have in a lifetime. And it's because we're so, yes, the benefits of being connected, you know, we get to, I would have never met you, Davey, if not for this game and the internet and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we have to know how to be in touch with ourselves enough to know when to stop, when to take a break, when to take care of ourselves, and that sort of thing. And from a journaling standpoint, you don't even have to look at it from a therapy point of view, a therapeutic point of view. If you look at a lot of really top performers in various arenas, you know, read any of Tim Ferriss's books, Tools of the Titans, that sort of thing, and you'll see that it's a very common thing for top performers in different areas to journal, because again, it's a way of really not just coming to terms with what's going on with yourself, but also, like you said, a reference so that you can go back and see how far you've come, you
Yeah.
know, and give yourself a tremendous amount of perspective so that it's not just lost.
Yeah. Okay. Nutrition. I know this will be right up your alley. In dealing with the chemical imbalances that are both a cause of substance abuse and a result of long-term substance addiction, nutritional therapy can be helpful in several ways. Eating properly means receiving nutrients that give you energy, heal your body, and increase your immune response.
Right. So neurotransmitters are the chemicals, like some we've talked about already on this show, that are in charge of basically running your whole nervous system, right? Those are the those are what upregulate, downregulate, and affect how you run your conscious mind and your unconscious, the things that run automatically, your autonomic nervous system, everything in between. Somewhere between 90 to 95% of the neurotransmitters in our body are created in the gut,
Wow.
which makes no sense up front, but that's what it is.
Wow.
As more research is being done lately, the gut microbiome, the bacteria that live in our gut, are massively responsible for a lot of that. It can get very complicated when you look through, but the main takeaway is this: if you eat manufactured shitty food, you're not going to have the right microbiome. You're not going to be creating the right neurotransmitters. And of course, you're going to go through some, you're going to perform suboptimally um, from a nervous system and from your psychological and mental health standpoint.
Yeah.
Sometimes more than some people more than others. But the bottom line is nutrition is incredibly important. Now there's different schools of thought about ideal nutrition and whatnot. The bottom line is, look, real food, if it grew out of the earth, is probably a good thing for you, not something that was packaged or bought from McDonald's.
Yeah.
So, that's a massive thing in itself. But just remember, your neurotransmitters are predominantly from your gut, so you gotta treat your gut properly.
I read something online that really clicked for me, like illuminated a light bulb. I know I've always heard the thing, you are what you eat, and I just took it at surface value, you are what you eat. But this person further broke it down. When you eat stuff, that stuff eventually becomes cells that your body uses, like turns those things into cells. So like if you ate, like you say, a crappy McDonald's food, that may become a cell that goes to your spleen, your liver, your kidney, whatever organ. So eventually you become, quote unquote, a living manifestation of McDonald's. And we know how harmful, processed food is. I myself, I need to cut back on processed food because it is yummy for a reason, and it is to keep you addicted. But whole foods, whole unprocessed foods, like Vengeful said, foods from the earth, vegetables, greens, fruits, not prepackaged stuff with all the preservatives to give it a long shelf life. That is the stuff we should be investing in ourselves. Like if you look at what is it, a walnut? It's kind of shaped like the brain, isn't it? There's some foods that are shaped like different organs in our body, and from what I understand, you eat those foods to nourish those particular organs. Is that correct?
Yeah, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But yeah, I mean, from a grand scheme of things, look, we evolved over thousands of years
Right.
eating real food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just in the last maybe 80 years, 90 years, we've gradually bastardized our food. And to think that humans would have just fully evolved to eat this crappy food is, I think, ridiculous. So, it's and it's true. You are what you eat, because what you take in. I mean, what else are your cells going to be made of?
Right. It's true.
Where else did it come from?
True.
You eat food to provide the nutrients to fuel your body. What else are the building blocks? It's literally what you eat.
Wow.
So, different tissues have different amounts of cell turnover, how long they last in your body. But over the course of time, if you eat much better, right, over the course of several years, you literally made out of totally different things, and therefore you'll feel differently. And I think, that's such a massive component to, bring it back to addiction, right? If you're not operating functionally as a physiological being, of course you're going to be susceptible to any of these outside forces.
Right. Yeah. And the final one is yoga. Yoga allows you to enter a meditative state through monitoring your breathing and moving your body with purpose. It can contribute to a greater sense of self-control in more acute states when experiencing cravings, insomnia, agitation, etc. One of the things about yoga that I didn't understand about until some video I was watching on YouTube explained it. They would always talk about make sure you're breathing slowly, deep breathing, and I would get agitated because it's like, I didn't come here to breathe. I breathe every day. I want to stretch my stiff body. But what I didn't realize was that a lot of people, including myself, we shallow breathe. And shallow breathing means you're not fully using the full expanse of your diaphragm. And that puts your body in a state of fight or flight, meaning when you're like, you know, your body's producing adrenaline and all these things as a response to possibly being attacked. You got to defend yourself, or there's immediate danger. You got to run away. So if the majority of your day is spent shallow breathing, then your body's producing all of this cortisol that what does high levels of cortisol do? Does it contribute to like heart attack and that kind of stuff?
There's a variety of things, but basically you're not having the proper balance between your sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight,
Yeah.
and your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest, and diaphragmatic breathing, which is your deep belly breathing. So,
Right.
you know, just put your hand on your, and as you breathe, if you don't feel it, your actual belly going out and in, you're shallow breathing, because you're then put your hand back on your chest and you probably feel you're breathing just there. I do it. Like, it's just like we all do it.
Yeah.
Right. So if you take the time to intentionally breathe with your diaphragm, that changes your heart rate variability. It does all there's a tremendous amount of research that supports the benefits of diaphragmatic breathing, whether you do it in the context of yoga or elsewhere. I will say this: yoga, I've done for many years, probably not very well. Like the part about it, you know, giving the greater sense of control in the more acute states and that sort of thing, I've never experienced that. Like, I have this monkey brain that just keeps going, you know. And so
Yeah.
I can do my best to meditate and try to observe the monkey brain and whatnot, but that part is difficult for me. But from a stretching standpoint alone, it's
Oh
super
yeah. Oh yeah.
incredibly helpful. And if you don't like the traditional forms of yoga, DDP yoga is fantastic. I've been doing it for years.
Oh really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Plug DDP on Mega Day. So
Oh snap. And just going back to the point about breathing, if I am just here casually doing something or just lay on the bed or whatever, and all of a sudden I'm feeling stressed or anxious, I'm like, why am I feeling stressed and anxious? And because I am consciously aware now about breathing, it's like, oh, I'm shallow breathing, like for no reason. So then I just take a moment and take a few deep breaths to reset my body to that place where it needs to be. So if nothing else, if you don't do the yoga, if you are feeling anxious or stressed, check your breathing out. And then finally, these are the resources for help. The National Council on Problem Gambling, their website is www.ncpgambling.org. They have an online chat. It is ncpgambling.org /chat. Their telephone number is 1-800-522-4700. Or if you prefer to text, you can text the same number. That's 1-800-522-4700. That's the end of our show. Any final thoughts?
yeah, and we'll have all those links in the description here in the YouTube video. So look, I'll just say this: we talked about a lot of stuff today, and we're gonna have this interview here coming right up after this point with Futurepro. And I'll just say this: like, it's sometimes there's a lot of stigma around getting help. I dealt with depression for years, and I didn't want to get help because I felt like I'd be seen as weak if I did. And looking back, I wish that I had, you know, no regrets now, because life turned out well, you know, but at the same time, now I know when to reach out. We were, think about it this way. How many people, maybe listeners right now, we've heard it time and time again on this podcast: I would have quit the game if it wasn't for my faction, right?
Yeah.
The friends that I've made in the community. Why is that? Because we are community-centered organisms. We aren't lone wolves. We're not Baron Corbin's here, right?
Yeah.
We are designed to be in community. We are designed to help each other out, right? So if you're struggling, you can get help, and it's okay to get help. And just know that there will be a time that, because of your experience, you'll be able to help somebody else. And that's how it continues. So, and helping somebody else is one of the most rewarding experiences you can have. It puts all of these addictions and things like that behind you, because There's, we're talking about dopamine release. There's nothing more gratifying than having a lasting, legitimate impact on somebody else's life. It is, that in itself is kind of addicting, except in a very, very positive way. So there's nothing wrong with doing more of that, right?
Yeah.
So that's all I'll leave you with. I don't know if you have anything else to say before we get into the interview here.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed this more than I thought I would have. And like you said, our hope is that if it even just helps one person, then it was a success. Stay tuned for Futurepro. Today we're just gonna get straight to it. We have a very special guest. We have Futurepro with us. Welcome, Future.
Hi, guys. It's an honor for me to be in your podcast, of course, and thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Now, you are usually we say we have special guests, but you are a special guest for a particular reason. And our listeners will begin to see that as you tell your story. So, could you tell us a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah. So I'm 36 years old, and I started as a wrestling fan as a kid, as most of us, I think. Watching my first WrestleMania, I can remember. I watched live was on TV, of course. It was WrestleMania 3, and then I went on from that. Um, from that moment on, I think I never lost a WWE pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
I maybe have lost some WCW one, but not much. So it started off.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think a lot of us got involved at a young age. Certainly, WrestleMania 3 was a big one for me too. I think you and I are pretty close in age as well. Actually, all three of us. So that one's a memorable one for sure. So why don't you tell us your story? What's your history with gambling addiction?
Okay, so it all started when I was 16, so pretty young age. And believe it or not, guys, this is something I call, after all this time, I call like it was a curse on me, okay? Problem was that I got introduced into gambling by old friend of my high school, and the very first time I bet on something, the curse started because I actually won a lot. Okay, it was the beginning of my escalation to doing and making very, very bad things on my life, very bad decision.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about, so you said the first time you gambled, you won, right? And to me, relating to this game, that's like when you do one of those early mega pulls and you get them, and then you're hooked, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
So going back to what you were doing, like if you'd be willing to share, maybe some of the games that you played, and or the things that you bet on, and what, if you're willing to share, maybe some of the amounts and the impact that had going forward.
Yeah, I will share everything possible, and most of all, I will share the sensations, the feelings that you proved during those times. Okay, it's like as when you ring a bell and you give a dog something to eat. Every time you ring that bell, the dog wants to eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm explaining that.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's okay. That's the concept. So when you have that feeling of winning, you day after day want that feeling, want to feel that feeling again and again, more and more. Okay, and you become addicted to that. You you can't stop researching for that, and it's all in your mind, of course,
Mm.
and that is 24/7. Your life is set on that. Okay,
Wow.
you have a job, or you know don't. In my case, after school, I had a very good job because my parents used to have a bar and a restaurant, and I worked there, and I had no problems in finding money.
So you had mentioned earlier it's a feeling that you chase. Are there any specific stories where chasing that feeling had a significant impact on you where you had to like take a step back and look at everything you were doing?
Yeah, I have a couple of those. I think one of those was very important to my life, and it was like this. I started to have less and less funds available going on as time went by. So I reached a point in mid 2010, July 2010, where I had on a Sunday, I had something like 500 in my pockets. And as usual with my gambling buddy, we went to the race course. And we happened, of course, by the end of the day, to lose almost everything. And I lost, I lost everything that day. And he did too. And we were quite far from home. We were almost 400 miles from
Wow.
home. And
Whoa.
yeah, and we didn't have a buck in our pockets. Okay.
Hmm.
So it was very hard how to manage to get home. So because we didn't have fuel on our car. Okay. And I remember that that night we slept in the car, and we waited because it was starting to be quite late at night. It was midnight. You can call or telephone anyone at midnight and ask for money.
Right.
how you do that? Okay, so we waited until the next morning. The following morning, we asked for we called by telephone a friend of ours, and we begged him. He knew us, but we begged him to give us at least $100 to get home. Okay, we what did we do? We got those $100. We have $50 of fuel, which was enough without eating. Okay, that was a day and a half without eating. With the other $50, we bet on a horse the very next day.
Whoa.
Oh.
Okay, and we were, I don't know if I can say that we were lucky enough, but long story short, that horse won, and from $50 we had $400. Okay,
Hmm.
with those $400, what did we do?
Gambled some more.
Bet again.
Yeah, instead of going home, give the guy his 100 back, we went on and went to a different race course the very next day. We we won that day. We won an awesome lot, and I remember we got from $400 to, I think. Then this is good, guys, because this explains how bad we were, how bad I were. Okay, And I got from 400 to a couple thousands,
Oh, wow.
yeah. And this was the Monday. On Tuesday, those couple thousand last more or less 3 hours.
Oh,
We lost everything
Oh my
again.
gosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, we were home. Okay, we were home, and the very next morning, I woke up and I looked myself in the mirror, and I thought to myself, I needed to stop this. That very day, it was the last day I was a gambling addict, and I changed my life completely. I got, I moved first of all. I moved part of town where I live. I had a new job, and I started having two jobs so that I covered two shifts
mhm.
because I wanted to mm, give the money back to people who helped me out. And after 3 or 4 years of that very hard working life, I managed to pay everyone out. And as I told you, I started to be an improved person. And I started to being able to have a bankroll management. I never gamble on anything again. Uh, I'm not afraid of seeing the people I knew back in the day. Not at all, because I never got that itch again. Okay, I had to get to the very bottom of that.
So
And
basically, I didn't mean to cut you off. Basically, you're saying that when you moved, you also had to leave behind that circle of friends who would enable you to gamble and reach a point where you are strong enough now that if you should see them again, the memories and the emotions that are entangled with knowing them wouldn't pull you back into that lifestyle.
that's right, 100%, Davey. That's correct. I don't have a problem now, but back in that time, I had to do that
Yeah.
because I think the itch was very very high.
So when you got introduced to champions, well, first of all, tell us how you got introduced to champions and what familiarities between, the mega pulls and whatnot was similar to gambling and how you have been able to avoid those traps, or if you've seen anyone falling into those traps, like how could you advise people to stay away or better balance and manage it?
Yeah, I got introduced by champions because one thing I forgot mentioning was that during the course of those years, which went from me being 16 to me being 28, the only common denominator on my life was wrestling. Okay.
Yeah.
I never missed, as I told you before, I never missed a WWE show. That was my second passion. Okay.
Hmm.
So last year, during a Raw episode or a SmackDown episode, I don't remember, I saw the advertisement of WWE champion. Gameplay is addicting.
Hmm.
Farming is addicting. Not to mention pulls. Okay, pulls are the most addicting thing that there is in the game, and I myself, I'm saving a good amount of money for 4 stars now. My next pull will be for Macho Acrobat because I don't have a good Acrobat. I will have 130 pull. Luck not by my side. I'm done. Okay, I wait until the very next time Macho will be available.
So you're giving yourself 130 pull
One,
anytime he's
yeah.
available.
That's a one token in your luck. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's a good approach to take, and I think that was one that Big Papa Brian had talked about too. That instead of trying to do whatever it takes to get a certain guy, you have to be aware of what your current, your current financial situation is and all that stuff, and just say, okay, you more than likely you're not going to get him. So if you give yourself a certain number of attempts, whatever makes the most sense for you, and plan it out in advance. In your case, the planning out in advance is anytime he's available, 130 pull, and that's it. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But you don't seem to worry about it otherwise.
Not at all. Not at all. Not worried at all. I can afford spending $100 once a week, okay, or twice a week now. Doesn't affect my life, okay. Most important thing, guys, never spend outside your bankroll.
Yeah, for sure. You've been more than generous with lending your support to anybody that's dealing with megapole addiction and the financial tragedies that result as overspending your means. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Discord. I am Futurepro, and if you want to contact me, feel free to do so. And that's it.
Thank you so very much for coming through and giving us your stories, your insight. And this has been the 2vement dWo podcast. Hope you guys have a great day.